Hi.
Good evening, sir. We are just waiting on all of them to join up, and we'll begin at 5 o'clock.
No problems, no problems. I just thought I'd log in a little early in case of any technical and other issues. You can see and hear me clearly, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Hi, Alok. Svetlana here from IDIA.
Hi, Svetlana.
Hi.
Nice to meet you. I've exchanged quite a few emails in the past.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
Yes, we have. Nice
Yes.
meeting you finally here.
You too. You're based in Bangalore?
No, actually, I'm in Delhi, but our office is in Bangalore.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been to your office. I had met
Yeah.
you, but okay. Nice to know. Hi, Adeeba.
Hi.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Hello, Alok.
Hi, Pranav. Husain's also just logged in. Hi, Husain.
Hi, Alok.
What's up? How are you?
Yes, I'm very well.
Good. Nice to see you. Long time, actually.
Yeah.
Hi, Hussain. Hi, Pranav.
Hi,
Hi,
Svetlana.
Adeeba.
Hello. Hi.
Someone brought a scary figure. Some 480 people have signed up for this.
Oh my God.
They did, but yesterday's session had some 60-65 attendees.
No, because it's rare that, and I'm seeing the attendees list. It's rare that even 5 minutes before the webinar starts, we already have a long list of attendees waiting for the webinar to start. Husain, in what order do you want us to speak?
Alok, we can speak like Amita ma'am wanted to go last. So maybe we can begin with you. Then we
Okay.
can go to Svetlana and then Adeeba. And at last we can go to Amita ma'am.
Sure. So I have about 10 minutes, right, for my opening remarks and points.
Yes, exactly.
Good evening, ma'am. Can you hear us, see us? Yes.
Looking there for you and you're here.
Yes.
Kaise ho?
I'm fine, ma'am. How are you? How are things? Good. You're in Delhi, ma'am, this now?
No, I'm in Hyderabad.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yes.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Hi.
Yeah. Good evening,
Hi,
Amita
ma'am.
ma'am.
Good evening. Hi.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
So for those of you who don't know, this is like a very big circle coming to an end. Not an end, but coming to the same point, because I was in Professor Dhanda's seminar on legal education in 2008.
Wow.
There were six or seven of us, I think. We would meet at your
Yeah,
staff.
so today I'm going to check it out. कि कितना सीखा तुमने?
I knew that test was going to come, so it is what.
That's why I said I'll speak last. चलो ठीक है.
Okay.
This is amongst the nice things of all these webinars. You can carry your own tea and you have your own protocol on how you're going to behave. Actually, Alok, I am finding that for a lot of people, even as we're all bemoaning the absence of the offline class and what have you, I'm also finding for a lot of young people, the online is giving an opportunity to actually flower out and speak.
Okay.
People who wouldn't otherwise speak, it's like the screen is proving to be some protection.
Okay. Okay.
And, just notice, because I'm finding lots of people who in a live class may or may not speak.
Okay.
Have started kind of participating. Certain people find it easier to just, type in something, other options which are there, and okay. At least I'm noticing it quite substantially. Like for persons with autism, this is always one of the accommodations that they seek. That even when they are in an offline class, you don't look at them.
Sorry. Hello, is my connection okay? I
said even when you're in an offline class, you don't look at them directly. The screen is a protection.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
possibly for a number of people, the online is doing something similar.
Okay. Okay. Well,
it's worth observing and looking at. I'm finding that different people speak now in the online classes than from the ones who would speak in the offline class.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. But I briefly taught a seminar course at NALSAR. Like this was a 1 credit, 2 credit course. But I have found it really tough to teach online. It's just a different technique, yeah. It's a very it takes a very different thing, because I teach these short courses every once in a while and I enjoy it. This was on constitutional aspects of taxation, and it usually makes for a very fascinating discussion. But it just felt like I wasn't getting through. I don't know if I was getting through, if I was not getting through, if like the points. It just didn't seem like I was taking a class. It was just like it felt like I was talking to yourself. Yeah. So I'm like, next time anybody calls, I'll say, please, I'll pay for my travel and stay. I'd rather come and teach in person. No, I don't think this is a money problem, because anyway we pay for travel. That's true. No, it has been only because during this pandemic, but I'm trying to say to you is that a lot of people, and I'm also saying that the live class has its own charm. But I can say this, for me, the online class has meant I've learned how to lecture. I didn't know how to do it before that. I would be so annoyed that anybody wants me to give them a lecture. I kind of changed my methodology. I would use about 40-45 minutes of class to lecture, then use the rest for talking through and like kinds of things. I started using PPT, which I never use for teaching. It was like this, Alok, that if I wanted them to read something, it is a tall ask in very difficult times to tell people you have to read in my class, I'll throw you out of my class. You can't do that. Yes. And yet I want them to read. So I started finding that, key sentences, stuff that I wanted them to read, I put it up on screen and we'll discuss it along with. I'm just telling you that there are other ways. Oh, that's right. And I think it's something that probably requires its own set of techniques, and we can't just. Absolutely. And it's like thinking like a teacher, like, okay, how do I get across? I have to get across. That's my challenge. Yeah, absolutely. You can't sit there and shout at students and say, "Tum padh ke kyun nahi aaye?" You will have to, as a teacher, read and come for class, because you can't rely upon them and think that, okay. They will.
That's right. So dear panelists, so can we begin now? Because Kautilya Society students are putting up comments. Okay, so good evening, esteemed panelists and viewers of this panel discussions and people working hard in the background to make this conference possible. So today we have gathered here to discuss inclusive legal education and how it can be reformed. We shall be making special reference to domicile reservations. And this is also an opportunity for us to discuss the report authored by Fellows of Kautilya Society, NLSIU Bangalore. And the title of the report is in Domicile Reservations in National Law Universities. The report has been authored by upcoming legal education reformers, Pranav Dhawan, Binit Agarwal, Sarthak Wadhwa, Khushi Maheshwari, Kopal Mittal, Soumya Singh, and Kriti Jain. Before I introduce the esteemed panelists, I would quickly lay down the context in which we find ourselves sharing this platform this evening. So almost 100 years ago, it was Sir Tej Bahadur Sapru who lamented that legal education has developed slower than other departments of higher education. He was referring to the quality of legal education in 1934. And the quality of legal education continued to haunt even after independence, where it was thought that legal education is going to produce leaders for this fledgling nation. And by early 2000s, when economy was fully liberalized and national law universities had already established a formidable reputation for its quality, another battle began. The battle to produce or impart high quality legal education in a relative sense was partially won. But the second battle was inclusive education. The word inclusive is, of course, loaded, but the word inclusive is being used in the context of access, that who gets to procure admission to these high quality national law universities. Now, inclusion can be thought of, as I said, access. It can be thought of as diversity, and it can also be thought of as post-admission inclusion, that after admission, how do students from different social groups feel included with the institutional atmosphere. But for the purposes of this conference, we are going to lay special focus to regional diversity, and that is how we are going to discuss domicile reservations. So I'm going to cherry pick one issue from the well-crafted report, and the report discusses Pradeep Jain versus Union of India, and it discusses that domicile reservations is going to help in making legal education become accessible to backward groups in a particular region. And here an important, or let's say an ambitious question to ask ourselves is that what kind of regional diversity is diversity that we all are aiming for? Is it horizontal diversity, that how many states are represented at a particular institution? Or is it vertical regional diversity, where we talk about what is the representation of tier 1 city, tier 2 city, tier 3 city, tier 4 city? So that's the vertical aspect of it. And looking at this vertical and horizontal idea of regional diversity in the context of domicile reservations, one broad question is that how does domicile reservation help us to reach the regional diversity that we are aiming for, whether horizontal or vertical? Now, I would like to introduce the esteemed panelists. Now, the first panelist is Dr. Amita Dhanda. She is Professor Emerita at NALSAR, and she has been working in this area for the past 40 years almost. And she has written on disability and on legal education. So warm welcome, Amita ma'am. And our second panelist is Mr. Alok Kumar, whose op-eds I think we have been reading in the past. At least I read it throughout my law school. So he does not need an introduction, but still he is co-founder of Vidhi Centre for Legal Policy. And he's commented on legal education. He has written on domicile reservations, among many, many other things. And our third panelist is Ms. Svetlana Correya. She is Executive Director at IDIA, Karnataka. And fourth panelist is Mrs. Adeeba Rahman. and she's director of IDIA, Karnataka. So I would like to first give mic to Mr. Kumar to present his opening statement.
Thank you, Husain, and good evening to everyone. Let me first start off by saying that I have to congratulate the Kautilya Society of National Law School of India for the stellar work that you have put into this report. It is deeply researched, it raises a lot of thoughtful questions, and at least speaking for myself, it gave me a lot of things to think about when I want to speak about the topic today. And I'm sure it will inform discussions on inclusivity in the context of the legal education in India. And that's a very broad question, it's a very wide question. We obviously may not be able to cover the entire gamut of issues today, but I think even in the limited scope of domicile reservations in national law universities in India, I think it raises a lot of questions. Second, I must mention that about 15 years ago, 13, 14 years ago, I think I was in the same classroom. I was in the classroom with Professor Dhanda on a seminar on legal education. And she has said that she will treat this as a second presentation taken over 15 years after the end of the course. So I hope, and apart from, of course, also convincing others about what I'm saying in my argument, that I will also get to show Professor Dhanda how much I have learned in her class and how I've tried to build on it in this context. So, and of course, any failing is mine alone. So that's not to pass it on to anyone else. So without any further ado, let me just sort of go right into the heart of this subject. And I know that other speakers after me will speak more specifically about inclusivity and diversity in national universities. I think this is an issue and a topic that has occupied a lot of time and energy, and I think it's something that we need to continue debating, because in as much as we sort of say that, oh, if you have a quota for SC and ST or OBC and so on, it'll take care of things. It doesn't necessarily do so, because that doesn't necessarily doesn't necessarily address other problems of inclusivity that happen post-admission. So I leave that to some of the other panelists in the discussion. But I want to take a step back a little bit and talk about the pre-admissions part of it, and talk a little bit about what we see as the purpose of these national law universities. I was sort of thinking a little bit about the term national in the context of the National Law University. And I sort of wondered what this national is supposed to indicate in the title. We have the National Law School of India University, and we have the NLU occurring in various combinations, except in, of course, NALSAR and in NUs, where there is slightly different terminology used. But I think the term national, or at least the term, definitely the term national is common to all these universities. And when it says national, it seems to indicate that the vision and the purpose and the student body of the university should necessarily be drawn from the nation as a whole. Now, I want to offer a slightly different perspective on this, in the sense that while that is a perfectly worthwhile goal to pursue, that need not be the only overriding goal when you're choosing a student body for a university. We do have, of course, we have now said that there will be a CLAT, and that's an entrance exam, and with everything else related to entrance exams in this country, there's a serious set of problems. For those of you who haven't read Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud's judgment in Neil Aurelio Nunes, it's a good starting point for a critique on entrance exams themselves, and those create further problems. But in terms of who gets to be in it, right? And then this is like who even gets to sort of write these entrance exams. You have to accept and understand that there are significant barriers to access here. But there is one other thing that we also have to keep in mind in sort of identifying who the national part of it is like, who are the people whom we imagine to be the student body of these universities. And I want to bring another principle which underlies our constitution into this discussion, which is the principle of federalism. India is a federal country, not by accident, right? It may not be a federal country exactly like the United States, but it is a federal country, very unlike, say, the UK is kind of more unitary form of government. And this is an important point because federalism wasn't some sort of an accident that happened in India. You see, if you go back and read the Constituent Assembly debates, you see very passionate debates about how much power should be devolved to the states, how much power should be kept to the center, there are strong critiques of the constitution even at the time when it was drafted, saying this centralizes too many things. And let's also keep in mind, one of the basis for partition was also of the kind of federation we wanted India to be. It wasn't just, of course we all talk about partition in pure Hindu-Muslim terms, but partition also was about a principled objection to the power of the center. For one group of people, a strong center was the only thing that could guarantee development or the future of India. For a group of people, it had to be much more devolved. The power had to be sort of left to the states and so on. So this is an important principle. And the consequence of this is that education at first was left almost entirely with the states, right? Except for a little bit of maintenance of standards in the context of professional education, and that is including everything from primary to tertiary education, was in the hands of the states, because it was understood that this is something states are best equipped to do. Not entirely by themselves, obviously. We need different standards of education. We need to have certain kinds of common minimum norms for professional education at least. But this is something that was believed that should be in the hands of states. And then it was moved to the concurrent list, but it was never moved entirely to the union list. Now, when it has been moved to the concurrent list, there is no one complete code which says this is how all of education in India should take place. 99% of the laws, except for maybe the Right to Education Act, 99% of the laws relating primarily to education, right, are by state governments, right? Whether it is with regard to primary, secondary, tertiary education, they are largely by state governments. And state governments aren't just departments of the central government. They're not there to implement some larger idea that the central government has set. They choose their own priorities, keeping in mind the needs of the people of the state. And this includes choosing the manner in which education takes place in that state. To give you an example which comes from a slightly different perspective, and when I wrote, by the way, the domicile reservation article that a lot of you have read and is also cited in this particular in this particular report, this particular issue hadn't gotten that prominent in the context of law, but I'm talking about the NEET, the National Eligibility Cum Entrance Test, in the context of medical education. We see that the state of Tamil Nadu is making a strong federal argument saying why there should not be one common entrance examination. And they're not just making an education argument, they're making a public health argument. This is an important point to keep in mind, that when we're talking about education, of course, is an end in itself, but it need not necessarily be the only purpose for which you're setting up certain schools, institutions, and so on. If, for instance, you want to create a legal education which promotes justice in your state in accordance with the needs, the customs, the practices, the demands of the people of the state, there should be freedom to do so. And that, of course, will involve elements regarding to syllabus, will involve elements regarding to recruitment, will involve multiple things. But one of the things that it will also have to do is to give enough space for those in that state to access this quality legal education. Let's keep in mind there are some underlying assumptions in the context of the national universities that hopefully will be explained in more detail. Will also go on into more detail by other members on the panel, which is that there is an assumption that high quality legal education involves spending a lot of money, getting together the best talent, putting them in the same place. And this is an important part, by the way, believe me, in as much as a good chunk of my legal education happened because of the fantastic classroom lectures of many professors, including Professor Dhanda, for instance, a lot of my learning also happened afterwards. It happened when me and my colleagues and peers were able to talk, to relate to each other, to get to know each other, to understand how we came from different parts of the country. If we recreate the exact same experience, and I'm not dissing NLS because it was the first institution of its kind, it gained certain kinds of dynamics by virtue of being the first, and likewise the first 3 or 4. Now that we have an NLU in every single state, it might be necessary to think of other objectives that the state government might want to sort of achieve with this. And some of which may not just be to say, let's give more seats to those from our state, or let's just give more opportunities. It might be to allow them to see how legal education can fit into the larger policy objectives that governments in this state want to accomplish. How do the people of this state want to improve the judiciary? How do we ensure that the standard of the bar and the judiciary in this state are improved And we might, as a state, want to say that we will attract, we will sort of give an opportunity for our students to study in this institution, interact with the best around the country, and use that for the betterment of the state itself. So just to conclude, I just want to introduce this idea into the topic to briefly summarize that perhaps one of the underlying principles, one of the values for which we might want to see, and I'm not even sure reservation is the exact term, and let me call it, say, domicile preference. One of the reasons to sort of think of domicile preference might be the need to strengthen federalism in India, the need to push back against the dominating idea of the nation. Let's also accept that there is, like, whatever idea of nation it is, it can't be that one size fits all idea across the country. It's never going to happen in India, and that perhaps leads to more conflict. And what might be needed is multiple different ideas of India sitting next to each other, and that might be something which might be possible with, say, the idea of federalism come feeding in to the way in which so-called national law universities function, and in the way in which they choose their student body, in the way in which they choose the syllabus, in the way in which they choose their recruitment. So this is one value that I want to put out. So when we think about domicile reservations, we think about the way in which this might particularly further this national goal. So I'll stop here, and Husain, you can move on to the others.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kumar. These are very important inputs. Thank you for this opening statement. With this, I would like to segue into the next topic, which will be covered by Ms. Svetlana Correya, that is importance of diversity in law school campuses for an effective inclusive education program. And she'll also cover some major areas of diversity according to IDIA surveys. And generally, she'll also talk about reforms for inclusive education. So to you, Ms. Correya.
Thank you, Husain. It's a pleasure to be here with such a wonderful, well-read panel and able to present a few thoughts that I have on this subject. So IDIA has, in fact, over the years, trying to work in this area of diversity deficit that we see in a lot of national law schools that are considered as premier legal educational institutions in the country. What we have tried to do is try to ascertain certain parameters where we feel that law schools have still not been able to reach out to a large mass of, masses of Indian students, be it across geographical diversities, gender diversities, linguistic, and other so on and so forth, social diversities that we are considering here. I would just like to highlight a few areas that we have been noticing during these diversity surveys that we conduct. I'll not go into the details of it because we'll be releasing the report soon and it will be on our website. So any of you who's interested to get into the details with regard to numbers or analysis can go to our website once the report is put on it. But just to give a brief of why we have been conducting this survey and what is the population that we are looking in. So majorly, we look into the top 5 ranking NLUs, and these rankings are mostly on student preferences that we see in CLAT applications. So the top 5 usually are NLS Bangalore, NALSAR, NLIU Bhopal, NLU Jodhpur, and Delhi being outside the consortium, but still would be considered as one of the top 5. And what we have been noticing is, since 2013, in fact, we've been trying to conduct these diversity surveys annually, and the trends have been, unfortunately, pretty same when we are looking at the patterns where we are finding deficit in the context of diversity. One is, of course, the geographical representation that we see in law schools. A lot of students come invariably from 4 or 5 states that are consistently, sending students to these top 5 law schools, be it UP, Rajasthan, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh. We hardly find adequate representation from any of the 7 northeastern states, from a lot of union territories, except for, maybe Chandigarh, Delhi, if we consider. And In fact, in the present diversity survey of 2020-21, we find that in the top 5 NLUs, only 7 students come from the northeastern states, constituting a little more than 1% of the law school population. While if we compare it to the national population, these states, constitute almost like 5% of the national population. Gender diversity again has been skewed all these years. In the latest diversity survey report, almost 60% students are male students taking admissions to these top national law schools. And the area of concern is whether legal education in the country is following the pattern that STEM studies generally see, male students preferring and getting some kind of an upper hand when it comes to the sciences and technology related subjects, where the legal education is unfortunately seeing that trend as well. Going forward, we try to look at whether the recent, not so recent, in fact, the 2016 Act of the Persons with Disabilities, which we had that 5% reservation should be provided in educational institutions. Since almost a year or so back, a lot of NLUs were still not following this statutory mandate and were anyway between almost like following the old 3% reservations. What we interestingly also found was that a lot of students who identified themselves to be persons with disabilities, the percentage was a little more than 8%, but students who actually got admission under this category was still around 3.5%, even less than the statutory 5%. So what are the reasons for this skewed number there? Whether it is the lack of awareness among students that they fall within this category of reservation, whether a large number of disabilities are still not included as benchmark disabilities under the Act, it's yet to be determined. Then religion, again, major discrepancy, major, if I would say, like number-wise that we see is students from Muslim communities, is representation is hardly 4%, when the national representation is close to 14%. So again, very problematic numbers over there. We also found, since we're talking about inclusivity in legal education, the reason why I'm highlighting these numbers is that even though national law universities now in the country command a position of quality legal education, have we been able to reach out to students across the length and breadth of the country so that they can make use of this, the higher education that is provided, that has been set up in the country for now several decades now. A lot of factors that have come play, which shows systematic disadvantage for these students. Medium of instruction, for example, a lot of students from vernacular mediums who do not have a so-called a good background in English are left behind right at the initial stage when it comes to accessing good quality legal education. Similarly, we find the rural-urban living disadvantage. Students from rural areas, less than 20% are able to apply and sit for exams like CLAT or IELTS. Almost 80% of the students who are taking up these exams have completed their higher secondary education in a tier 1 or tier 2 city. The whole pattern of CLAT, you cannot think of sitting for CLAT or IELTS exam unless you have spent a fortune on training and preparing for these exams from a private coaching center. Again, out of the reach of a large number of students who are, brilliant young minds out there whom we are not able to reach out to. Funding, another issue. In our surveys, we found like close to 20% of students whose annual family income is less than 4 lakh a year. But the funding available, in the form of scholarships. It's only like 7% of these students are able to avail scholarship from national law universities. So glaring discrepancies here where legal education is not being able to reach out to the students that it should ideally be going to. Just a couple of points again on when Alok was also talking about that, on the panel, we would be discussing about inclusive education once the student enters law school. But I think I would take, this platform to also highlight that students are systematically and institutionally disadvantaged even before they get the opportunity to appear for these entrance exams. CLAT fees, for example, the amount that CLAT charges for the application fees is way beyond than what the actual expenses is in conducting these exams. Again, the requirement of English proficiency, another problematic area. And year in and year out, we keep hearing about glitches. If CLAT is going online, then a lot of problems, the system's not working, the online whole arrangement not you being up to the mark. When CLAT is offline, we don't have enough centers in rural areas where students can access. So all these fundamental issues are also something to be looked into before we can talk about inclusive education in law schools. Because essentially, when we are talking about inclusive education, we are also talking about developing a pedagogy where we are taking into consideration the needs of different students coming from diverse backgrounds. We are including the component of need-based education. But if the population on our law campuses is homogeneous, the whole idea of inclusive education will fall short of achieving the objective that it is meant to achieve. So just a few points on the diversity aspect that I wanted to highlight when talking about inclusive education. On the reservation aspect, the domicile reservation aspect, I just have one or two observations mostly. And these observations are, while, again, going back to what Alok said, the federal structure of the country, keeping in mind that if states are getting, providing domicile reservation, it does serve quite a few purposes. But looking at from another angle, we at IDIA felt, when the Delhi government provided like 50% reservation, it came up at NLU Delhi. A lot of the trainees that IDIA had trained, they were coming back to us and saying they feel doubly disadvantaged because they've come through a long way fighting social discrimination and other such disadvantages all their life. And at the moment when they thought they could have access to a premier legal education like NLU Delhi, their chances were cut short by domicile reservation. Similarly, with students from geographically underrepresented states, the Northeast, and other such areas, are we well equipped with quality legal education, quality legal institutions across the country, so that these students who are otherwise disadvantaged are not left out again when we're talking about domicile reservation? The last point with regard to domicile reservation that I would like to put forth here is how are we considering, this will become a point to look into when we are talking about reservations for PWD students, SC/ST categories, etc., when domicile reservation is implemented. If I'm not wrong, in Maharashtra, the reservation for PWD students was given only for the seats which were reserved for Maharashtra domicile students, considerably cutting off the total number of seats, and eventually also cutting down on the number of seats reserved for PWD students. So some observations there on the domicile aspect, and that's mostly what I wanted to put forward in this talk.
Thank you so much, Ms. Correya. So Ms. Correya talked about diversity in the top national law universities, and I would want to take this as an opportunity to showcase what Jamia Diversity Sense is established, because IDIA covers top national law universities. So a minority institution like Jamia Millia Islamia remains a blind spot, probably for the entire legal industry. Also because it's not an NLU, it does not occupy as much mind space. So Jamia Diversity Census established that it is more accessible to people who are from low middle class, from poor backgrounds. For example, 46% of them come from small towns and villages, tier 3 and 4 cities. And relating that to what national law universities establish, it might be interesting to point out that NLSIU happens to be a more diverse institution as per NIRF rankings. The score of NLSIU is 27 out of 30, but score of Jamia is 17.5 out of 30. So Jamia is losing because of lack of diversity. Now here comes the question which I mentioned very, very fleetingly in the beginning, that how do we decide a particular institution is regionally diverse? So Jamia has 43% or more than 80% students coming from tier 3 and 4 cities. But at NLS, such students constitute a far lesser number. They are about 50%, 50 to 60%. So we see that students coming from smaller towns and villages are more at Jamia and less at NLS. But yes, at Jamia, they come from small number of states. From very few states, students are coming. So it is faring well on vertical diversity, that students from even small places come up to the institution, but it fares poorly on horizontality in terms of number of states that are being represented at the institution. So this was just an interesting question on which our next speaker, Ms. Adeeba Rahman, can also reflect. However, her specific sub-theme is inclusivity in online legal education in times of COVID-19. Over to you, ma'am.
Very good evening to everyone. So I'll be talking about, making online education more inclusive and diverse during these times, during this hard times. So as we all know, it's been 2 years that we've all shifted to, online-based education, online-based conferences and everything. So it was really important that we address this, and we need to work towards making online education more inclusive, because it's really not, if you think about it, which I'll be talking about now. In light of this, actually, IDIA conducted in August 2020, IDIA did a small survey amongst 18 law colleges in the country. And this report is actually found on our website. If anyone's interested, you can just go through it. And we conducted a survey and we got 880 responses for it. We circulated 2 sheets. One was a Form 1, which was circulated only to the chapter team leaders of our chapters. And what the information we wanted from that Form 1 was regarding the methods chosen by the colleges to conduct these online classes, like the evaluation scheme and the attendance scheme and method of online classes. And a Form 2 was distributed amongst the students of the 18 law colleges regarding any issues and concerns and any suggestions they have regarding these online classes. So the thing is, I'll just like to give you some general information also, that how online classes are conducted. It's usually used, the platforms most likely used are Zoom, Google Meet or Cisco. And most of the colleges, I think only 58% of the colleges, as per our responses, had a call-in option. So unless you don't have internet access, you could not access classes. Yeah. And most of the colleges had, 4 to 5 hours worth of class hours, each being 45 minutes to 1 hour. Now that we have some general information, I'd like to talk specifically about the problems faced by students in these online classes. Okay, so the first thing is, we can't have online classes without good electricity, without good internet connection, and without a good device. So when we talk about electricity, out of the 880 respondents that we surveyed, 35% of them belong to rural or semi-urban areas, and they complained of having electricity less than 12 hours a day. in such a situation, it's really hard for them to attend classes regularly. And yeah, that's something really that we need to think about. So is our online education as inclusive if most of them don't have, that much access to internet and electricity? And when we talk about devices, a lot of the respondents had the thing that they had to share their devices with other family members. Most of them could not afford, many of them could not afford to have such separate devices, and many of them didn't even have laptops to attend classes. They would, use phones. And another problem arises here, that many phones would not support, online class platforms. So it gets really difficult. And so I spoke about devices, and yeah, and about internet also, it's very hard to have in rural and semi-urban areas. Internet is also very erratic. You're not going to have that good internet. So this is really a problem faced by many students even now, even though this report was taken in 2020. So if I think about IDIA, so many of our scholars, in fact, they asked to go to the nearest, if we would give them permission to go to a nearest bigger city and stay in a hostel or PG just to attend their classes, because it's really difficult for them otherwise. And then when we come, another problem is the mode of evaluation, mode of instruction and tutorial sessions. So many of the students here said that when teachers took class online, it was very lecture based, and the students would find it harder to ask doubts, and it was not at all a tutorial based session. So many students really shied away from coming on camera and asking questions, or they said they would easily get distracted also. So it was very yeah. And I think that a suggestion would be that we need to actually mentor the faculty to take classes which are short and also more tutorial and doubt, or maybe they can take classes, a separate doubt clearing sessions for the students or something like that, which because when there are like 60-80 students on attending the class, they do feel a little awkward to ask questions, is what the survey has laid out. Yeah. And then regarding access, see, all the students were so used to using hard copies. They would go to the library for reference, or they would buy. Suddenly, when there's so much PDF and online material, many students have said even this is a bit harder on them. They prefer that go to library and access. And even though many universities provide remote legal and social science databases, again 40% of the respondents said that they could not access this from their devices, which is again a problem. And regarding mode of evaluation, so this was really difficult for the students. Suddenly they had open book exams, but because it was open book, they said that the questions were really hard, and the students who came from smaller cities, rural areas, they could not actually write those kind of answer, and they had a lot of research based questions. So one thing is the colleges could think of going for more application based exams, like based on the applications they've learned in class, rather than research based, because these children really find it hard to research and write long answers. And some of the colleges, even though it's online classes, many of the colleges still today have marks for attendance. And again, it goes back to the problem of electricity and internet access and everything. So many of these children actually miss out that 5 marks, which is quite crucial in a law college, just because they don't have the adequate attendance, So this again, it has to be, maybe it's better that those colleges still giving marks for attendance revoke this, because it doesn't give way for inclusivity at all. It's and regarding financial constraint, it's another big problem. Many of the students said that their parents lost their jobs, and they're finding it tough to pay their fees at one shot, or even so the colleges can think of taking giving them time or helping them get interest-free loans, or give them time without, give them more space and time to pay the fees. Only during the survey, only 10 out of the 18 law schools has actually reduced the fees. So maybe the colleges can only, as electricity, etc. is not being used, they can, reduce the fees accordingly and only take minimum salary that the staff and the teachers, etc. need. Another problem was physical and mental health issues. Out of the 880 students that were surveyed, 10% of them complained of physical issues, and about 1/3 of them complained of mental issues due to online classes. So physical issues included bad migraines. So many of them complained of constant chronic migraine and headaches, and many of them complained of backaches and eye pain. And regarding mental health, they said that they started getting social anxiety, social isolation. They started all those things that they never felt when they attended class, they suddenly felt. And in fact, now when colleges reopened and I spoke to some of our IDIA scholars, they said even to go back to class after so many days of attending online classes, they felt really heavy. And they I think it's like our Monday blues but after a long time. So yeah, they said they felt really low, they were very worried. And I think all those mental health issues, not only in IDIA scholars, but I'm sure many people face that as per the report. And also conducive home environments is another huge problem that people face in online education. Since it's pertinent to note that 37% of Indian households have only one room. Accordingly, it's so hard for all these children to have the required privacy, to attend classes with full concentration. And you need that concentration, especially when it's online, and you can't have that space and everything if you're going to live in a house and you have to constantly share your device, answer questions. Many of them said that their parents don't understand, they're sent for errands in between their classes. They don't sometimes they don't understand. So another suggestion is that many colleges again have a compulsory internship every year. So in these when there are online classes, it's very hard for these children to get internships, because most of the firms and litigation firms, corporate firms, all have gone online, but then they don't want to offer those kind of internships. It's very hard to get through. So by colleges making it compulsory, the pressure on the students are a lot. And then if the colleges still want to implement this, they should help the students find internships, or give them an alternative that if you can do an offline one, go. Because honestly, many people don't want online internships. They don't want to offer online internships because they feel they have to spend more time on these interns. And yeah, that's about it, what I wanted to discuss, the problems faced by students during this online education during COVID. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rahman. These are very valuable inputs. And a quick takeaway from this is that along with the question of regional diversity and domicile reservations, this is an issue which continues to exist despite any kind of regional representation or domicile reservation. And it's an important question that how do we make legal education inclusive, irrespective of who gets
Sorry,
represented? Because
I think I missed a point. I'd like to talk about specifically about people with disabilities, especially VI scholars, visually impaired scholars. I'm so sorry I missed it. So when we speak about them, they have so many problems when it comes to attending online classes. So when I spoke to a few of them, they said when teachers share PPT or whiteboards and everything, it's very difficult for them because they're blank. They don't know what's happening in the class. So in such situations, it's all, and if images are shared in class, it's always better to have all text so that these visually impaired students can know what the topic is, what the image is, etc. And what they said is most of the, even when it comes to exams and evaluation, now most colleges have gone to descriptive answers. And these visually impaired students find it very hard to type, to 500-word essays and everything on the screen, because they take a long time. Even though they're given extra time, it's still not sufficient for the amount of work that they need to put in. For them to type like that is very hard. Yeah, just wanted to bring this up.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Rahman. Now I would like to move on to the last panelist of this discussion, Dr. Amita Dhanda. I'm very excited to hear what she has to say. She will be covering the sub-theme of domicile reservations, disability, mode of inclusion. So over to you, Dr. Dhanda.
Husain, I need to share screen.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Here. I don't know what has happened. I learn each time and I forget each time. So could you just help me as to how do I get this damn thing to be full screen? Sam? I can't.
Yes, ma'am.
I think if you enable editing, ma'am, it might actually be make it easier. This enable editing part. Because
I've lost the whole darn thing. You are saying it is saying you're screen sharing, but where the hell is it? I don't know.
Oh, okay.
See, it's more like so that I don't lose my way. It's the screen sharing is happening for that reason.
Ma'am, do you want to email it to us?
I gave it to you, Husain. I sent it to you. You have it, no?
Yes.
One second.
Ma'am, maybe one of us can share our screen and do it.
No, I would prefer to do it myself. Enable editing. Fine. Take it. Got it. Now, how do I set the darn thing? It's okay. From beginning. Okay, chalo, right. Not bad. It's a part of when you have an older person on the panel, you have to accommodate the older person. That's one part of inclusive legal education. When I was listening to Adeeba, I was very tempted to be saying, we did this differently sort of thing, but I think I'm not going to do that. I want to sort of have a more kind of a conceptual conversation with you. And I've kind of worked out my presentation into 4 parts. I want to look at the varied motivations of undertaking inclusion. I want to see the disability model of inclusion. Want to talk on the Kautilya Society's report and how they have looked at domicile and inclusion. And lastly, I want to leave you with this whole idea of what is and what is not inclusion. So when I talk in terms of varied motivations of inclusion, I find that also in every one of the presentations, to some extent, I would say Alok struck a different chord when he was sort of talking in terms of where you are talking about inclusion, not just in terms of what it's going to do to the people whom you're including, but what it may do to a society or a system or a state. But largely when we talk in terms of include or conduct reforms, we're saying it's to provide equality of opportunity. I'm sort of, that's the very thrust point. And Adeeba's entire presentation, before that Svetlana's presentation, each of them was stressing upon the kind of disadvantage and the kind of exclusion that has been experienced. So the entire thrust of inclusion or reforms for inclusion was what we can do for those people who have been left out. So the other kind of, there are two ways, at least two ways, I mean, there are multiple, but at least two broad ones I would want you to think about. The other is to undertake inclusive education, to have the universe come into the university. To speak, when you speak about a university, you speak about a place which is like a microcosm of what your entire society is like. And if it is not that kind of a university, what's the kind of learning is it doing? So in fact, when you do not have an inclusive system, then what are the consequences of that? So the first way of looking at inclusion, I think I'm putting out here as benevolence, as sometimes penitence that, oh, we left you out, so we're setting it right now. Or maybe recognition of rights for other people and say you must have on an equal basis with others, you must have exactly the same chance that everyone else has. Whereas the second one, when you say you bring the universe into the university, you are acknowledging that the mainstream or the dominant prototype that you have created has deficits. And for you to have more rounded kind of education, I would say diversity is a very vital ingredient. And the point which Alok made at the start, when he said, okay, great, classes were great and all, if I was sitting there, he could hardly say they were bad. But in the sense of even as you concede to the classes, you recognize the fact that a large amount of your learning actually happens in the cafeteria, happens in the places you go out for. At NALSAR, students used to have this, like what they best remember, what they most miss about NALSAR. And everybody would be saying that Shankar's Dhaba or whatever. It was that guy scored over everybody else. And that was the place where they did the maximum amount of learning. And for that is to who are you hanging out with? Who are the people you're meeting? What is the kind of diversity that is part of your institution or the way in which you're organizing things? You're talking more than in terms of that, okay, knowledge requires widening of horizons or that wideness. Then that widening of horizon can't just be that I travel around and I get my horizons widened. It is that the place that we construct itself should have those broad horizons. That's the first point I really want to make, that you think of these two models of inclusion and really worry about as to why is the second model not as much in our discourse as the first is. I'm talking about disability and inclusion as another kind of, again, the two models that I've spoken of in the first slide, I'm wanting to reiterate it in a different kind of way. One way of looking at disability and inclusion is, oh, we've given you 5% or 3% or 7% reservation. You've come in and that's it. Our duty is done. We've got people with disabilities in our university. Our quotas are filled. All that is okay. I think we'd also mentioned this factor you had, I think, Husain, when you started doing your remarks, you had spoken in terms of that, okay, when it's the inclusion which comes after you get people in. Now that very often for all people who come in under affirmative action quotas of various kinds, that is the inclusion that they're all saying doesn't happen. That you come in there and you're dumped and everybody's forgotten you. You don't know, you don't have the same kind of social capital, so you don't really know how are you going to cope in this place where you find yourself. So I would somewhere say that amongst the critical factors in disability, when you take the disability model of inclusion, if you take it at its like optimum best, you would say, then you have to first create an environment which acknowledges human diversity. So right from making your buildings to the libraries, to the furniture, to the kinds of stuff that you do there, you accept the fact that you're going to have all manner of people walk these pathways. You can't sort of say, oh, why should we make a lift? Lift is too expensive. Anyway, how many people with disabilities are going to come? This is a conversation I used to constantly have for the little period that I was registrar in a building committee meeting. And I was saying, yeah, you don't make them, then you don't let anybody come there at all. And we just you get an audit done of your institution, you don't even recognize in how many different ways is it ableist and it is rejecting of disability. So I would somewhere say that disability perspective, where when you say you create an environment which is acknowledging of human diversity, is again feeding into that second model of inclusion that I was speaking about. And the disability perspective would then say the manner in which you create your course curriculum, the learning techniques that you employ, the evaluation methods that you use. I mean, I think Adeeba's entire thing was, oh, like, why are why can't you customize? And you can only customize if you firstly acknowledge that everybody has a right to be there and you need every one of the people who are there. And that customization is a very integral part of how you need to think about inclusion. So if you think about disability in the deficits model, or you think about disability as diversity, and the fact that you are seeing diversity at its utmost is a way of like starting to recognize that, okay, one size really doesn't fit all. And if one size doesn't fit all, you recognize the fact of multiple intelligences. You recognize the fact of that some of us learn by doing things on our own. Some of us learn by the teacher telling us exactly. Some of us want to be challenged. Some of us want to be left alone. And as a teacher, how much of that diversity in your classroom do you absorb and do you respond to? Do you see people when you talk? Do you see the variety or you talk to 4 students who are smart and let them run your class and it works? I think, and when you talk, and I'm saying reasonable accommodation policy for all, I am somewhere saying that it shouldn't just be that if you are a person with disability and you can't cope with our mainstream system, we can do this, that, or the other for you. This is recognizing the fact that there are always times where all of us require that the rule should in some way recognize my personal difficulty and accommodate me. That the outcome should be education. Don't get so obsessed with the blessed process. If this rule has to be followed, if in the process people die, who cares? That isn't the way in which we need to be conducting education. And I think the fact that this kind of open-mindedness comes in from disability rights and disability studies perspective, I would somewhere want to inject that perspective in the way in which we think of inclusion. To come to the Domicile, the Kautilya Society's report, I would join Alok in saying, yes, that I think as a legal analysis and setting up a strong legal case for domiciliary reservations, the report has done a good job. And I mean, it is like heartening in the sense of they found all the kind of arguments which would be made for why this is not constitutional and to be demonstrating that the Karnataka High Court got it wrong. So they've set up a good, strong legal case for domiciliary reservation. I wouldn't say quarrel, but like I would want them to think further on, is that why are you staying? In some manner, you're also staying with the first model. You found you have justified domiciliary reservation on 2 grounds. You said you bring it in because if the state wants to evolve and develop, if it wants to keep the best experts for itself, it should be given that opportunity. So that is one ground for which it should be okay. The other reasoning that you've given is very backward students, they should get that opportunity. Both of them are thinking in terms of something you are doing for, that particular region, that you are allowing them this, like in our magnanimity, we are saying so. Whereas I would somewhere want that, like, why is it that we seriously need to think, not in terms of what the Supreme Court has to say or what the High Court has to say or what this case or that case, but on first principle basis, because if we are a law school and we are supposed to be this primary institution, then I think we should be able to think on first principles. And from thinking on first principles, my thing would be, why is it necessary that national law schools must have domicile reservation? And I definitely do think it's not, there is a diversity question. There is also this question of you don't have domiciliary reservations. I think one of the things one of the questions that your report misses out, at least for me, I kept looking for it, was that, okay, you've made some general comments that no much difference. I could have said, take any one's law school and find out how many of local people actually came in before domicile reservations came. And how many happened afterwards? Is there a dramatic change there? I am telling you this, at least my own, this is only, it's an impression about NALSAR, but I definitely feel that our local population and how many people came into the institution increase substantially after domicile reservation. And because we have it for general and for all other categories also, so the reservation runs for each one of them. So it's not like, it's just one reservation and anybody can take it. So you have your SC, ST, you have disability, and you have the general category, and you proceed on that manner. So my thing somewhere is this, that if one takes it from there, that is one question, sorry, this just came on the side. My issue more is that if you are not having people from the region, and if you're not interacting with people in the region, you are like like in no man's land. You're an institution which has no roots. You are, after all, see, all of us, all our law schools have come in by acquiring land from some village or the other, because we are in these way beyond places. What are we giving back to that community? And I'm not talking, and how much do we know of the place where we are situated? What is that context that we have an idea of or not? If you have, whether it's, and in terms of your actual doing of education, your clinical legal education goes up so substantially the moment you have a sizable demography of people who know the local language. And you start learning some of the local language because you have somebody who is can teach you some of it. All of us pick up at least words and sentences and all of those sorts of things. So you become like one with the region in which you are staying. It's not about what you can give off to that region, but what that region will be giving you on an everyday basis. And that's something that we are not talking about. And I think that's something we need to hear. We should not be really thinking about, "Arey, hum to sab sorted hai. Hamare pas jo aayega, wo bas, is going to come, is going to get this marvelous experience of happening us." Arey, thoda sa, little bit humility. What's so bloody happening about us? And my entire take, and I have no difficulty with, I think it's a very, very good, competent job as a legal argument. But one of the difficulties when we only stay with the legal argument, Pranav, is this, that in some manner, heart gets taken out of the whole thing, and too much concession is given to authority. So tomorrow, supposing the Supreme Court of India upholds the Karnataka High Court's judgment, you have not in any which way given them a moral reason for not doing it. To say that what kind of judges are you? You in your own court, you want diversity. You'll say itna kota yahan ka, itna kota wahan ka. There is no judge from, your transfers get engineered in this manner that you should have people from every state of the country in the court. The same rule applies for other people too. No, you need more composite kind of institutions. So that bit is what I find is an absence. And I'm not saying that it's a deficiency, but it's an absence. And it's an absence which possibly has a lot to do with the way in which we study law. We study law in, as reflectors of what legislators and courts and judges have to say. We also do theory. It's important for us to think about some of these things on first principles and then see how we can marry the law and the first principles thing together. My last slide. I do want to say this, and I think it's important for us to think that what is not and what is inclusion. I think both of these questions need to be thought about. Inclusion is not add and stir, and that is one of the biggest difficulties in the manner in which we've been running reservations. We get people in, and then we ask them to just become like the rest of us. We've given you the opportunity of coming into this privileged portal. You should be thankful for that. So you've just been, you're not in, I've taken a very, I think a very culinary analogy and a metaphor. I'm saying it's actually like this, that with every ingredient that you add, the recipe needs to change, the name of the dish has to alter. You have to think differently. You can't say, okay, with this, we're going to get a whole range of trans persons into our university, but we are going to talk about sexuality, or we're going to talk about the whole business of diversity as if to say they don't exist. You might as well not bring them in, because you're going to actually be doing people an ill turn rather than really trying to widen your own horizon. And that's why I feel privilege needs to not reflect on disadvantage. It needs to reflect on privilege. It needs to reflect on the fact of why are you so great, yeah? Your report also reports the fact of how many Brahmins that we have and how many people who come in from, legal lineage families, that your old father was this thing and stuff, like to some extent you say that the national law schools have broken that. How much has it? I really am not sure. I don't think so. I think when it comes to whether it's in terms of how much capital you make from getting your admission into a national law school, which are the best internships and who get them, all of that, or even the recruitments which happen subsequently, I really do think that if we are serious about talking about inclusion, we must firstly have some good heart searching conversation on privilege. The moment you start to do that, the moment you bring yourself out and say, yeah, I don't know, but okay, fine. Every day at breakfast, my grandfather or my father would be discussing this, that, and the other, and I have grown up with it. So there are some issues in law which has come to me naturally. And your other colleague is going to say, yeah, every day when I used to come to the breakfast table, sometimes there wouldn't be a table and there wouldn't be breakfast, but these were the kinds of things I had to do and rush and do them before I could go to college. That the moment you start having those conversations, you start to understand exactly, why is it that, because it's a fact that reservation is our shortcut to inclusion. It's our, some salve to our conscience that we are doing something. It's not really discussing inclusion. So I am of this view that it's only respectful sharing in a spirit of mutual learning into believing that we have a give and take. If we start conversing from there, we are talking inclusion. Otherwise, we're just feeling good for ourselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhanda. These are very, very valuable comments. And Dr. Dhanda largely covered the importance of communitarian ties of an institution. And
no, I didn't cover communitarian ties. I'm sorry. I covered something more complex than that.
Yes, of course. And a law school having ties with the area around it. And secondly, the inclusion that takes place after a student has procured admission to a law school, which is post-admission inclusion. And with this, I would like to bring end to the opening statements. Now this house is open to take questions from the audience.
Don't bother about me. I'm just like that. I was just saying, Alok, you tell Husain that I'm just like that. He shouldn't worry too much on that count.
Yes, ma'am, that's completely all.
I've already messaged the needful.
Yeah, it's like, okay, nahin, maine aisa nahi bola tha. That sort of, don't take it too seriously.
Okay.
Ma'am, I had a question.
Yeah, sure.
Ma'am, so when we talk about changing the recipe of the dish and changing the name of the dish, then you're basically talking about changing the character of the institution. And can we really change the character of the institution if we continue to have our instruction in English, which really is the language of the 2% of this country? And so shouldn't when I was thinking about the brief, I was thinking of some measures that Tamil Nadu is taking in terms of having reservations for government school students to study in vernacular mediums. So when we think of domicile quota, is that something that we should think about? Because it is a possibility that through domicile also, people who come in might not be speaking Kannada or Telugu and might just have gone to very elite schools in Bangalore or Hyderabad and would just be speaking a different accent of English. So how do we make that diversity more substantive in modular terms?
Are you asking me, Pranav?
To you and all the panelists, but since the recipe idea came from you.
No, see, Pranav, I would just want to say one thing to you. I was setting up an argument, right? I was saying that, listen, change the way in which you think about inclusion. Once you change the way, then how exactly are you going to bring that diversity, the kind of combination you want? You look at the CLAT exams. I mean, it's a shame, the kind of nonsense that we are asking people to be knowing. And it's even in simple level things of, okay, what your general knowledge is meant to be. You're meant to know who won which particular football tournament where. I mean, what are we doing? You can start altering what you're going to ask in that CLAT exam, depending upon the kind of diversity you feel you must have. And the added advantage of doing that becomes is then you are not, I'm just saying these are alternatives because you're saying we need diversity for ourselves. The moment you start to say we need diversity for ourselves, you start thinking of processes by which you can do. And one of the processes is definitely the exam. Like I would say that, you start asking more agricultural questions. You start asking, like more questions which are looking at the diversity of experience. You work out a way by which you demonstrate to people that tumhara sab merit jo hai, wo, it just stayed where it is. The moment we change the world of which we are asking you questions on. And then the point which was being, I think so many people made it, that the coaching schools and the costs there and all of that, you have to be smarter than the coaching schools. If they can anticipate you, then what's a big deal? Yeah, I mean, if that person who is literally speaking, just memorizing and looking at question papers we have been drafting for, and you can't create an unpredictable question paper. Because you can, and the one advantage of doing that, Pranav, is this, then the person who's coming in is coming in because he maxed that paper, he killed that paper. So tumhara sab merit dhara dhara reh gaya, you expose that merit and you start proceeding thinking that. I was setting up an argument, I wasn't working, because when you start thinking like that, then why shouldn't a mandatory, at least if we are, I have been, it's a different thing that I always tell all my Telugu friends that you are horrible people, you don't teach me how to speak. I mean, I only understand in this many years in Hyderabad, it's a shame. I mean, I'm saying it honestly, it's a shame, but it's not like for a lack of desire to learn. So if you were to allow for, we'll say we'll teach French and Spanish. Why can't we be teaching, like, okay, whatever is the region's language? If you have to be doing your clinics in such and such year, before that you should be learning. And it's not just the language, it's the fact of people from the region when they come in, they bring the wealth or the learning or the heritage of the region into the class, and it should come. If we are situated in a certain place, we should know about it. That's about all I have to say.
Thank you, Dr. Dhanda. And any other question? We are still open for questions.
I think, Husain, there are questions in the chat box.
I cannot see them.
Yeah.
Okay. So Dr. Dhanda, I have one question. So you talked about post-admission inclusion. So I also wrote about it in the context of, for example, Jamia Millia Islamia. So once an institution has representation from different regions, so that can probably be called a beginner's luck, where we have got the representation aspect of it right. Now the second battle comes that how do different students coming from different regions as well as different size of the cities, for example, from within that particular state, for example, from Hyderabad, there are students coming who hail from a smaller town, let's say. So how can we establish full inclusion where the atmosphere of an institution is such where everybody feels included? And then and just thinking about an intersectional aspect of it, that how will a disabled person as well as a person coming from LGBT community and someone who is, for example, a Muslim. So how can we think about applying full inclusion considering these varying diversities? And this is something I was asked and I failed to come up with an answer to it.
I'm sorry, Husain, I partly got what you said, but I didn't get the start of your question. You said that, okay, if we need to, when we're talking in terms of internal diversities, that is in the region factor, I think that's what you were speaking about. And to be saying that it is open to every place, which means that you firstly open your mind, stop this blessed stereotyping, no? Okay, I'll just give you one example. How many of our institutions have, like toilets which are not gendered? That becomes your first entry point. No, I enter into a place and I find that it has, gender non-specific toilets. I enter a place and I find that, okay, whether it's a ramp or it's like the kind of, the sort of flooring I need as a blind person, it's already there. It's these kind of messaging with which you first say that you're all welcome. You have, signage, which is in all the kind of languages. You have like Braille, this thing, you have audio signals. It's so many things by which you communicate to people you are welcome. We know you, we think of you. You're not invisible to us. And it needs to happen. See, for all of us, we are doing this like as, we are now trying to fix things. But the new buildings that we are making or the new furniture that we are acquiring, simple things, we have these desks, where the table comes on the desk. Everything is, you don't have a separate table and chair, but you have a chair with the table. Ask as to how many right-handed and how many left-handed. If you are a left-handed person, have you thought about it that there are going to be this proportion of left-handed people? In terms of height, like, okay, if you're talking in terms of gendering, men and women, how much of that has been taken into account? So that messaging comes, Husain, in several kinds of ways.
Right.
You stop having your Saraswati Puja and you just sort of think in terms of what you want to be doing. I mean, every single function we have, we do that, what is it, lighting of the lamp and what have you.
Sure.
Can we think of other ways of doing these things? That's my point is, I am, frankly, Husain, I'm not real. If you were to say how, I would say, yeah, we need to work on it. I can't give you a patak answer. But I am saying put it on agenda. Definitely. Somebody was saying, what about CLAT exam in regional languages? I mean, it's a different thing that your CLAT exam in the English language is a disgrace, but I think we need to have that language advantage. I don't see one reason why anybody should be having it. People give you all the reasons in the world. They say books nahi hai, phala nahi hai. Aayenge bhi nahi, they will never come. It's a very chicken egg. They will not come till you kind of compel people that you have to have books if you're going to start this, you want to do that.
Sure.
I was just playing agent provocator. I was not, you can't say I don't have in my bag, a set of solutions I can hand out. But I'm willing to think with all of you. That's a different thing altogether.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. And now I'll move on to the questions. We do have a lot of questions, and I just could not understand how to operate it despite being young. And so yes. I'll just read out the question. And so she's written, my question is to Dhanda ma'am. I think when it comes to taking admissions through entrance exams, almost all these are in English, especially the CLAT exams.
Answered that one.
Sorry, ma'am?
I said I answered that one. I do really think that it's wrong.
Oh, okay.
So, I answered it in the chat box also. I answered it now because I read that question.
Oh, okay. So, ma'am,
I think the other questions are not for me. So maybe the other panelists can come in. Otherwise, I will just unnecessarily be doing danga for no reason.
Okay. So ma'am, I'll just read out this question. So the question is, there are many states that still don't have NLUs there, like majority of northeastern states, for instance. So do the students from neighboring states get advantage of domicile reservation as well in the only NLU in the area? If not, what could be done to bring inclusivity there? So any of the members who wish to answer this?
Alok Kumar, you please come.
Yes.
You go to sleep otherwise.
Yeah, I know. Professor Dhanda also used to do this often in class, by the way. When she found a slightly unresponsive group, as we used to be in the mornings, you would, Alok, answer. So I'll take my cue from that experience.
देखो कितने तुमने आर्टिकल लिखे, आज तक फायदा हो रहा है.
Yes. So let me just, again, this is something which is a tough question to answer for the simple reason that it's not as if a state can just say we will have an NLU and we can put up the buildings and everything will be done. This is something which, and we know that this requires a serious level of investment, not just in terms of the physical infrastructure, but also in being able to find the teachers and being able to find the other infrastructure which makes such legal education possible. We have seen, for instance, that In the Northeast, a lot of, again, within the different states, students have in fact had to move to Delhi to study. But I also think that this is something which has to be addressed at different levels. It might be that the only level at which this can be properly addressed is the central government. We see that the union government has funded a lot of institutions in the Northeast. It might be for them to fund such an institution, to say a central NLU, to cover areas in the Northeast. And you also have
Assam is there.
Assam has NLU UJAA. It could also, of course, provide for domicile reservation for everyone in the Northeast. It shouldn't just be seen, perhaps, again, given the specific dynamics of the region, it shouldn't just perhaps be seen as a national law school for just Assam alone, because some of these states were part of Assam in the past, have connections and ties, and you do have a fairly frequent back and forth between these states. So there are specific solutions which can be figured out, I think, and it might need that you in fact invest at the central level more money in sort of developing institutions here. There are a few institutions, but it's not just as simple. Say, for instance, it may not be a fair comparison to say, oh, if Maharashtra can set up 3 NLUs, surely the states in the Northeast can set up 4 or 5 between them. It's not such an easy comparison to make. That said, let's also keep in mind that there is a level of inbuilt inclusivity, perhaps may not be the best example of it, but we do have the fact that a lot of states provide for scheduled tribe reservations, and you find that a significant part of the population of people living in the Northeast regions also fall under this category. Again, that again only solves okay, you can write the entrance exam and maybe you might get a seat. It still doesn't address the further problem. How do we ensure that there is full inclusivity in this particular context? How do we ensure that their particular needs, that they're made to feel welcome in these institutions? I think that is the bigger question, and that is also something which needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Kumar. So we have one more question, and the question is that the person would love to have the view of speakers on conducting CLAT in regional languages in order to increase diversity at law schools. And the follow-up question is that how do we combat the fact that most of legal education is de facto in English?
I'd say maybe Adeeba and Svetlana, because they are in touch with a lot more law students. Yeah, I think Svetlana has her hand up on this, so I'll let her take this.
So I don't know if I may be able to answer this, because a lot of internal dynamics in the CLAT consortium will go into, discussing the feasibility of having CLAT in vernacular and Hindi language, languages other than English. But I just wanted to narrate, my experience. I didn't study in an NLU. I studied at Campus Law Center, Delhi University. And to give them fair credit, we had all our exam papers in English and the questions typed out in Hindi as well. So it would be bilingual. The entrance exam also had the option of students attempting the questions in Hindi. And to look at it, all the district court matters that happen in other states other than the Hindi belt region states happens in vernacular languages. So I think there's a lot of incentive for law school education also to change and modify to include vernacular languages. I think the feasibility can be worked out. It will be a little hard work on part of the stakeholders involved, including those helming the whole affair of framing the question papers and setting up the entrance exam papers. But it's worth a shot, and I think it's high time now that we start rolling out getting these vernacular languages into so-called like mainstream, and get our legal education system out there in languages other than English.
And if I can just add one point to what Svetlana just said. See, one argument always made against the inclusion of other regional languages is that no, but the language of our courts is English. That is actually not true. In practice, although on paper, yes, language of High Court and Supreme Court is English, and yes, English is used in the at the subordinate court level. You'll actually find, and those of you who have followed the Karnataka High Court hearings, not the hijab case one, because there obviously features a chief justice who's not from the state, lawyers out of the state. But on a more day-to-day regular basis, if you tune into the hearings, and you'll find those videos there, approximately 50% of the conversation actually happens in Kannada. This is at the High Court level. I can't speak of every other state, and I'm sure it won't be very different also. But where the judges and the counsels feel comfortable in speaking in Kannada, they do that because they are also aware that most likely the litigants are also those who are familiar in the regional language. So it's not as if knowledge of English is an absolute must. Yes, it does offer some benefits because you have way more material available in English, but in fact, technology might actually be reducing those barriers also. Those of you who would have seen, the Supreme Court has started translating judgments into multiple languages, but for some strange reason, they only translate judgments from Karnataka into Kannada, Tamil Nadu into Tamil, and so on. And I don't see the point. It's a very minor barrier to be able to translate any judgment into all of India's 20 national languages, if not more, depending on how well the code is trained. And I found, I compared somebody who translated manually to the official translation, and it was a very minor difference. It wasn't that I found hard to understand or I couldn't make sense of it, but it seemed to get to a level of accuracy where you're getting now to the position to be able to say there might actually be sufficient material to study in regional languages as well. And it may not, hamper your performance as a lawyer also to have studied, to have knowledge of a regional language in legal education.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Correya and Mr. Kumar. Now I'll take just one more question, and I'll just paraphrase this one. So the person is asking that women quotas and reservation in some NLUs creates some kind of discrimination because men and women, when they go and attempt CLAT, are going there as equals. So I suspect that the person is asking that do we really need women quota in NLUs? So whosoever wishes to answer that.
And I have answered him on the chat itself to say, yaar, aisa question to nahi pucho. I mean, itna to constitutional law and wo sab kuch you have been taught. We can't start from the beginning each time.
Right.
We can't really start from the beginning. I think if you were listening to the report which Svetlana was sharing with us, she said that this is the kind of despite the fact of even whether it's horizontal or vertical reservation, you still find the number of men in law schools is way more than what you have in terms of women. You also talk in terms of, because Alok is here, I'll take the liberty, you talk in terms of the boys' hostel politics in national law schools. You look at the way in which your SBCs function and how many places have got themselves a woman president or a major office bearer. It's like, you were not only taught formal equality, no? So go back and apply what you're taught. It doesn't mean that what you're taught is something that you sort of, you go and mouth in the exam and then you forget about it. Operationalize it. If you're talking in terms of substantive equality, why are you talking about it? I am not saying that reservation is the best way of getting in, getting opportunity in. But till you don't get better, then is it for us, the people who are people who are like feeling aggrieved by the reservation? Are you the ones who have to be spokespersons challenging it? Isn't there a straight conflict of interest, a theoretical conflict of interest in what you're saying? Chinta karo yaar. If we start off with this each time, should we have, what about merit and what about, if we keep on and on with that same set of ad nauseum questions, we'll never move further. I really mean it, ask yourself this question, how many privileges have I got, which I could never have got if I hadn't been lucky in who happened to be my parents? Important to ask, ki aapne kitna kamaya? What is it that you have earned? And what is it that it's just a lineage advantage that you have got. That's what I'm saying. If you want inclusion, have conversations on privilege. Have conversations on how much privilege have each of us got, which we just take it as our merit. How many things that you were literally born with, not that you have earned, and then talk about merit. When there was that, I think that there was that conversation that Siddhant Shukla and Chunky Pandey's daughter had, where she was saying, it's not like, what are you talking about nepotism? It's not like we get all the opportunities. I was not called for this show and that show and something like that. And there's that one liner that fellow says, he says, the problem is this, कि जहाँ से इनकी struggle शुरू होती है, that is our achievement and goal. I really feel some great soul searching is required for all of us to sort of think how much of it is I can say I earned. Only I got it. And how much of it is that you chose your parents well. That's the reason why I mean, whoever is the person who's asked me that, asked the question to everybody, but I just decided to play the teacher and said, you can't ask this kind of questions. I'm sorry that Husain also got that treatment for no reason. And he's like not looking at me only after that. Sorry, Husain, I've just decided I'm going to drag you through the whole thing.
Okay.
To be careful next time you invite me. Say, no, we won't call her. She's horrible.
No, ma'am, you're lovely.
Am I?
And I just would like to add one more point that women reservation is not only in NLUs, but it's also there in minority institution like Jamia Millia Islamia. So women at Jamia are 43%. And we did this calculation that if we just remove the 10% Muslim women quota, the representation of women will come down to 39%. So I agree with Dr. Dhanda that unless we do not have the best solution, we should support reservation, which may not be the best solution, but for now, this is what we have. So because of reservation, representation at Jamia Millia Islamia of women is 43%. Remove the reservation, it comes down to 39%. So why should we lose out on gender diversity as well?
I would just want to add on to what you're saying, Husain, and like it's amongst the things that one needs to be like asking very, I mean, I'm sorry, I was listening to it, I remembered and I've forgotten the point. But I do think that it's not just a question of, okay, right, the question, the point I wanted to make, Husain, was this. It's important somewhere for us to realize that when we attack reservation because we feel that our cake is becoming smaller, then you can't really say that your analysis of reservation is in any which way an objective, neutral analysis. You're already invested in why you are arguing the way you're arguing. Reservation requires a critique, but I think that critique has to come from the community. They have to decide that this is not good enough. You people are you're creaming off the best of. That's for them to decide. Till that doesn't happen, whenever it happens or not happens, I don't think that people of privilege have any business to talk about it. So you sit there and talk about your privilege, you worry about it, and you think and reflect and hopefully become more honest and conscientious human beings. Because one of the things that one has to accept is that, if you can only have genuine inclusion if you recognize the fact of that you're not such a top also, There's lots of things you don't know. Because the question paper is fixed for you, you will be asked the kind of things that you're comfortable with. You believe you're more meritorious, is I think something that we need. That's why I ask on every one of the questions. That, okay, you come into a law school, your brother also came, your father also knows the vice chancellor, somebody else knows someone else. It's with that kind of social capital you're coming into the law school. And I'm coming in there with, hawking my mother's jewelry and this and that and the other. Are we at the same place? Thoda socho. It's very easy to turn up nose.
Yes. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhanda, for your
Dr. Dhanda is horrible. I'm so sorry, Husain. I keep doing it, but I'm sorry.
That's all right, ma'am. So with this, I would like to bring this discussion to an end. Thank you so much, Dr. Dhanda, Mr. Kumar, Ms. Correya, Ms. Rahman. It was wonderful talking to you. I'll be walking out of this discussion more educated.
Thank you.
So much,
Thank you.
Husain. Thank you for taking all that ribbing so very sportingly. And next time, I will give you statutory warning and come. Okay,
Sure, ma'am.
at your own risk, kind of things you're calling me.
Yes, ma'am.
Bye.
Okay.
Bye, Alok.
Bye,
Alok, I'll
Adeeba.
catch up with you. We are bringing out a state survey of, an annual survey of state law. And I sort of we would be doing some kind of a panel discussion on it. So I'll write to you and just put it on your calendar that somewhere in March I'll pick up.
Absolutely. Lovely. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Husain. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye for
Pranav.
now.
Thanks, ma'am.
Bye, Shweta.
Thanks.